Let's take a look at the second example of how to diagram a nominal infinitive. So the second example reads, I'm using my third period sentences. To choose a least favorite class among so many is difficult for Isaiah. Well, the first thing I recognize is I have this infinitive here, which is to choose. And I also recognize that it's actually part of a bigger phrase. So I just want to kind of hear where it ends. And if you read it, your grammar one kicks in and kind of says, I can hear where this thing ends. To choose a least favorite class among so many is difficult for Isaiah. So here is the end of this phrase. That's really bad. I want to get rid of this thing because that's kind of blocking what I want to see here. There we go. Okay, great. So here's my infinitive. And then here's this verb is. Well, a verb needs a subject. So what's the subject of is? What is difficult? Well, this whole thing is difficult. So I want you to see that this infinitive this time is serving as the subject. When I say what's difficult for Isaiah, you'd say to choose a least favorite class among so many. Therefore, this becomes the subject of the verb is. So let's build this one, maybe not all the way at the very bottom, but close to the bottom of this white space. And I want you to see as you look at build the sentence, is your verb. As I go forward from there, I'd say is I have this adjective, difficult. If I could spell it right, difficult. Difficult. I'm a genius. That is very difficult. Difficult. And then it's difficult for Isaiah. And I'd say, well, what is difficult for Isaiah? Well, it's not just to be one word. It's not like choose is difficult or class is difficult. It's the act of to choose a least favorite class among so many. This whole thing is trying to squeeze in here as being the subject, but he can't do that. So what I have to do is I have to put this whole thing up on a tree. So let's build a tree here. Tall tree. I'm going to go for a tall tree today. And when I get up here, I got to say, okay, why did you build a tree? Well, we only have 3 trees right now. We have a prepositional phrase as a tree, we have a gerund as a tree, and now we have an infinitive. And I know I'm working with infinitives, so I'm going to go ahead and build that infinitive structure, which looks kind of like a prep phrase. And I'm going to come down with to, and always over with my verb, choose. Because a verb's always on a horizontal line, so that makes sense. So to choose, and once it turns into a verb, it can do anything a verb wants to do. This time the verb has its own little direct object. I'm choosing what? A class. Let's add in these extra words. A class. It's not least class. It sounds kind of stupid, doesn't it, to say least class? I could say favorite class, but he's not choosing his favorite class. He's choosing his least favorite class. Might even be mine, Isaiah. Might be. Least favorite class. And then we have among so many. Well, you could look at this as either being a class among so many or he's choosing among so many. To me, I like putting underneath choose. So I'm going to say he's choosing it among many, so many. So here comes down with the word among. Here's many as my noun. It's kind of a weird noun, but it is. And then here's so. Oh, what I love about this particular example is it kind of goes back to a rule that we're going to keep coming back to over and over and over again in this unit. The fact is, in most structures in Unit 3, almost everything we do in Unit 3 is not going to take a comma. There are only 2 comma rules I'm going to teach you, and I've already taught you one when we sometimes need a comma within a positive. But almost everything else I do is not going to take a comma. So sometimes people think, well, don't you put a comma after the word many? To choose a least favorite class among so many, comma, is difficult for Isaiah? No. And that's once again another reason why I love diagramming. It visually shows me why I'm not going to fall for that trap of putting a comma after the word many. Ignorant people do that because they don't understand grammar, but that's not you. You're going to be able to explain to someone, no, the actual subject's an infinitive. It's an infinitive phrase to choose a least favorite subject among so many. And that subject is just going right into the verb is. Think about it in another way. All right. So what if you said like, I like pickles. Well, no one would ever put a comma between I and like. You'd never separate your subject from your verb with a comma. That's just weird to do. So if we don't separate a subject from a verb with a comma here, why would you separate this subject from this verb with a comma? Just because it's really long? It's got a long number of words in it? That's silly. So just because something seems very long and complex is not a reason to punctuate it. All right. So it's not a reason at all. So therefore, it makes no sense for us to put a comma after the word many. You're like, well, what if I took a breath there? Yeah, you take a breath if you want to. I don't care. You breathe anytime you want to. Breathing is not a reason to put commas in anywhere. So therefore, there's no commas in this one at all. This is the weirdest sentence ever for me to actually have the phrase I like pickles. So I'm just going to get rid of that because it's just kind of ruining my diagram. All right, that's all for example number 2.